A missing mother of two from Reading is now the focus of a story that's capturing nationwide attention.
I knew she was taken.
Later that evening, Keith returned home from work, and as he drove up to his house, he saw his wife's car in the drive and expected his kids to run out as per usual and give him a big hug.
I saw our car there, and I opened the door expecting my son comes 100 miles an hour right at me, and then usually Violet right behind him. We do what we call, our family snuggles.
However, when he got there, no one came out, so he went into the house and had a look around to see if anyone was there. He thought maybe they'd just gone out somewhere, so he decided to call the nursery to see what time she picked them up.
First thing I said is, "What time did Sherri pick up the kids today?" And when she said, "The kids are here," that was like, something is wrong.
To his surprise, they were still at the nursery, so he asked his mum if she could pick them up so he could look for Sherri. He decided to use the Find My iPhone app and see where her phone was so he could trace her.
I did the, Find My iPhone app, and it showed where her phone was, so I assumed that's where she was.
He saw their phone was down the road, just where their mailbox was.
It's about a mile away, actually.
So he got in the car and drove down there to see if he could see her. When he was looking around, he couldn't find her anywhere, but he decided to get out of the car and have a look around. And that's when he found her phone placed down on the grass.
And it did not take me long. It was right off the road.
He took a picture of the phone and then decided to call the police.
I knew she was taken.
Hello, can I help you?
Hello? Yeah, I just got home from work, and my wife wasn't there, which is unusual, and my kids should have been there by now from, daycare. So I was like, oh, maybe she went on a walk. I couldn't find her, so I called the daycare to see what time she picked up the kids. The kids were never picked up, so I got freaked out, so I hit, the Find My iPhone app thing, and it said that it showed her phone, at our end of our driveway. We don't have really good service.
Okay.
Not the end of our driveway, but the end of our street. But just drove down there, and I saw her phone with her headphones because she started running again. And I found her phone, and it's got, hair ripped out of it, in the headphones. So I'm, totally freaking out, thinking, somebody,
What's her...
grabbed her. She has a vehicle that's at the house.
Okay, the vehicle is at the house?
She's running.
How? Okay.
Yes, I'm in it right now driving, and I took a picture of her phone on the ground before I picked it up.
Okay, how tall is she?
5'3", 5'4".
When's the last time you heard from her?
She sent me a text asking me if I was coming home from lunch. She sent me a text at 10:47 asking me if I was coming home from lunch from work. And I said, sorry, long day. And that was the last. Never spoke to her on the phone, never any other contact.
Okay, and what time are the kids supposed to be picked up?
Way before 5:30. She usually goes to 4:45.
Okay.
4:30, 4:45. And that's the Old Oregon Trail and Sunrise where they meet, because that's right where I found her phone on the ground. Telling me that something happened to her is the way I'm looking at it. There's then there was hair in the headphones. It got ripped off with they grabbed
Yeah,
it.
no, I understand.
Okay, I'm sorry. I know you're trying to keep me calm, but obviously.
Yeah. What kind of vehicle are you in?
I'm in a black Kia Optima. I don't know if I'm allowed to knock on everybody's door, but I will if I'm allowed to do that.
Hi, my name's Sara Jade and welcome to my channel where we talk about true crime, unsolved cases and more. In this week's case, we're looking at Sherri Papini and how she went missing one night after going out for a jog. But all is not as it seems. Sherri was born on the 11th of June 1982 and she lived in California with her sister Sheila and her parents Richard and Loretta Grave. She was described as a very wholesome and loving child who would do anything for anyone else. She first met her husband in school, where they used to write love letters to each other, and they had their first kiss. However, they soon lost touch when she left Reading to go to high school. In high school, she loved volleyball and attended theatre class, and was described as a very good student. Straight out of high school in 2006, she met and married a man called David DeFries. He was a platoon sergeant in the armed forces, so he spent a lot of his time abroad, so she spent a lot of her time on her own. This eventually led to them getting divorced just 2 years later, in 2008. She then moved back to Reading, where she rekindled her relationship with Keith, and after a whirlwind relationship, they got married in 2009.
I was just head over heels for her, and I knew I wanted to marry this girl.
A few years after their marriage, their first son Tyler was born, and 2 years after that, their daughter was born, called Violet. Keith worked at Best Buy and Sherri was a full-time mum. Her family described her as a super mum who loved to spend all her time with her children.
Yeah, she's an incredible human being. Best mom I've ever seen. I mean, her children, if you met her children, they're incredible. They're incredible because she's such a great mom. She's so hands-on. She really is the best mom I've ever seen. It's amazing. It's annoying because she's so amazing. We call her super mom.
They had a solid relationship, and she even had a blog writing about her family and described their marriage was full of love, joy and laughter. On the 2nd of November 2016, Keith got up early as usual, gave his wife a kiss goodbye and went off to work.
I gave her a kiss and a hug and went right out the door.
Sherri got up and got the kids ready and took them to nursery. She then came home and cleaned the house and decided to go for a run. She'd been training for a 5K that was happening on Thanksgiving. She then texted her husband about 10:47 and asked him if he was coming home for lunch. However, he was having such a long day and wasn't going to be able to make it home. Later that evening, Keith returned home from work, but when he got there, no one came out. So he went into the house and had a look around to see if anyone was there. And that's when he found her phone placed down on the grass. He took a picture of the phone and then decided to call the police.
I knew she was taken.
The search for Sherri started straight away, with loads of people turning up to help with the search. They put up missing posters everywhere, and this got the attention of the media.
A missing mother of two from Reading is now the focus of a story that is capturing nationwide attention.
The police had their suspicions at first, as they thought it was a bit weird that the phone looked like it was just placed there. However, they said there was no way that she just ran away. She would never leave her kids, and she loved them too much. Of course, the police first turned their attention to Keith, as statistically he would be involved in the case. However, after questioning him and him passing a polygraph test, he was ruled out. During their search efforts, there were over 20 search warrants issued. However, they were still no closer to finding Sherri or her whereabouts. After about 2 weeks, Keith started to get quite annoyed and frustrated with the police's efforts, so he decided to make a lot more TV appearances just to keep her name and face in the media. Keith also started a GoFundMe page, as he wanted to raise as much money as he could to get his own private detectives. He was able to raise around $50,000, but the police didn't feel that this was helping in the case. However, a multimillionaire watched one of his TV appearances and wanted to help. He wanted to stay anonymous though, so after getting in contact with one of Sherri's friends, she put him in touch with a self-proclaimed hostage negotiator called Cameron Gable, and he would be the face of the campaign. Now, there has been some different views about Cameron Gable's involvement. Some say that his wife had to persuade him to take part and that he just wanted to help the family, but others called him a scam artist and said that he just wanted to use the media attention to sell some of his courses. Some even said that there wasn't a multimillionaire and he had just made it up just so that he could get his face in the media. However, Cameron did get involved with the case, and he said the multimillionaire wanted to give $50,000 as a reverse ransom. This meant that they would give the perpetrator $50,000 just to return Sherri safe and unharmed. He went and made a video and let it out into the media, speaking directly to the kidnapper, saying that he had 100 days to bring Sherri forward, and he would receive the money, no questions asked.
My name is Cameron Gamble, and I'm an international kidnap and ransom consultant. I've been retained by an individual who wishes to remain anonymous.
However, after those 100 days, they still hadn't heard from them. He then went on to make another video, speaking directly to the public, and said that they had doubled the award money, and it was now a 6-figure sum if anyone could bring information to bring her home. The video went viral, but the police didn't like this, as they believed that they were cornering the kidnapper and he might do something irrational. However, just 24 hours later, on Thanksgiving, when Keith was preparing a balloon release for Sherri, she was released. She had spent 22 days in captivity, and she was found 150 miles away from her home. Sherri had been bound, chained, and had a bag over her head when she was pushed out of a moving car onto the street. When she landed on the road, she took off her hood and realised that she was out in the open, so she stood up and started to run for help. They'd captured her on CCTV running through the church towards the road. She started to run towards cars and asked for help. One lady called Alison Sutton was driving home from an 8-hour trip back to Yolo County when she had to swerve to miss Sherri. She thought if someone was running in front of a car, they obviously needed help, so she pulled over further down the road and called the police. The police picked her up and took her straight to hospital, but she still had chains in her arms. She had lost about 15 pounds, her hair had been cut off, and her body was covered in bruises. They were all at different stages of healing, so it looked like she'd been beaten over a couple of days. They also found on her right shoulder that she had been branded. When they called her husband in to see her, he was shocked at her appearance. Sherri couldn't remember much about the ordeal, but this wasn't very uncommon. As people have been through trauma, their body tries to protect them, so they don't remember much about the event. But she also didn't want to speak to the police, as she was scared, as her kidnapper had told her that the police had been involved and they were going to sell her to slavery. It would take her over a year to come forward and give the description to the police of her kidnappers. During this time, she moved back home and turned into a recluse and didn't give any interviews or say anything about her ordeal. When she eventually spoke to the police, she described how a dark SUV drove past her, then reversed back and asked for her help. There were 2 Hispanic women in the car, and as she approached, they held a gun up to her and said, "We don't want to kill you, but you need to get in the car." She then placed her phone on the floor and got into the car. She said they tasered her and stripped her, but she couldn't remember much about the drive, as she kept going in and out of consciousness. She described how they took her to a small home and chained her up to a pole inside the closet. She described her attackers as 2 female Hispanic women, 1 older woman and 1 younger. The oldest was mean and was described as tall, fat, with long straight hair, streaked with grey, and thick eyebrows. She was around 5'7" and spoke in a raspy voice. The young woman was less reluctant to be involved and seemed like she was pressured into being there. She was described as being around 5'5", with long brown hair and around 20 to 30 years old. They both wore face masks and spoke Spanish around her. They would listen to loud music and watch Spanish TV. They would only feed her on rice, tortillas and apples and would beat her on a daily basis. At one point she tried to run away, but they were able to get her back, chained her to the table and branded her, as they said that her buyer had wanted her branded. She then went on to say that they started arguing with each other, and one day during a fight she had heard a gun go off. She then remembers going in and out of consciousness as the younger one had put her in the car and then pushed her out onto the side of the road. This is when she took her hood off and started to run towards the traffic. When processing her clothes, they realised that she was wearing brand new clothes and there was only DNA on her knickers. However, this was a man's DNA, which they found was weird, as her kidnappers had been 2 women. They ran the DNA through Codis, but they didn't get a match back. The police released the sketches and put forward a $10,000 reward for anyone who could give information to help them find the kidnappers. However, no one came forward. Throughout the police investigation, they always felt like something was off, and when they dig further, more details came to light. It turns out that Sherri wasn't as sweet and innocent as she made out. She'd actually been investigated by the police a couple of times in the past. The first one was in the year 2000 when her dad called the police as she had been vandalising her house. Her sister then called the police as she had kicked in her back door and had vandalised her property. They called the police, but they put it down to vandalism. Then in 2003, her father called the police again as she had been withdrawing money out of his account without asking. She said it was a mistake and she didn't mean to take her father's card and she was very sorry, so he didn't press any charges. In the same year, her mum had called the police as during an argument she had started hitting herself and telling her mum that she was going to call the police and say it was her. So her mum decided to call the police first so they would get there and help her. She also had a habit of running away when she was a teenager. She would run to her friend's house and make up stories about how her family were abusing her. They then investigated her first marriage, as they thought it was a bit weird that they got married so quickly. She had also moved in with Keith just after a year of getting married. David eventually admitted that they had only got married to help her. She had said that she had got a heart murmur and needed medical help, so he agreed to marry her so she could take advantage of his health care. But a year later she rang him and said she'd met someone else and she wanted a divorce, and he was happy to oblige. Although it's never been confirmed, it is alleged that Sherri wrote a racist report on skinheads.com. The post is written under Sherri Grave, and it speaks about her unpleasant experiences with Latina women when she grew up, just because she was a white person. She said it was a cruel prank, and her husband described her as she was the least racist person he'd ever met. During the search for Sherri, people started to poke holes in their story. Her neighbours said that she never went for a run, and people couldn't understand why she put the kids into nursery if she had been at home all day. They also found out that she'd been seeing 2 other guys behind her husband's back. She was even going to see one of these guys just a couple of days before she went missing. When they spoke to him, they realised that it didn't actually meet up that day and he was cleared from the case. She'd also been speaking to another guy that she had met during youth group when she was volunteering. He described her as a attention grabber and was a compulsive liar, and said that she used to make up all these stories about how he was harming her and how her family used to abuse her. There was all this circumstantial evidence mounting up against her, but the main piece of evidence came from the male DNA that was found on her underwear. Now that the time had gone past, they were able to put the DNA through the familiar DNA system. This system uses family tree websites to pinpoint people that have the similar DNA. They were able to trace it back and found that the DNA belonged to one of her ex-boyfriends. They also went to collect a bottle from a piece of his rubbish and were able to test it to find his DNA. They tested it against the DNA that they had, and it was a match. So they brought him in for questioning, and he opened up and told them the whole truth. He told the story of how he had been cleaning his house one day and came across some of Sherri's items. He decided to send them back in the post to her, but then she got in contact with him. They were speaking for a while when she finally told him that her husband had been beating her and raping her, and she was trying to escape. She had asked for his help and told him how she had set up a bank account and was putting money in there, but she was scared for her life. She asked him to help her plan her escape, so they both bought burner phones and started speaking to each other for an AOL account. She convinced him to get one of his friends to rent a car for her. She then sent him a care package of where to pick her up. So on that day he had driven down to meet her. She had placed her phone on the floor, gotten into his car, and they had both driven back to his house. She then boarded up the windows and stayed in one of his separate rooms. He said they would just chat and hang out, but she spent most of her time in her bedroom on her own, and he would spend a lot of time out of the house. He then, however, started to notice that she was starving herself and only eating little bits of food, like she was purposely trying to lose weight. She then started to hit herself and just punch herself on the arms and legs to give herself bruises. She even asked him to help, but he refused to do so. He did, however, help her with the branding. She described how she wanted the logo, as it was like a tattoo for her. He thought it was all a bit weird, but he generally felt like he was just helping her and trying to help her escape from her husband. However, one day she decided that she wanted to go home as she was missing her children, so she made him rent another car and he drove her back home. This is when she got out and ran towards the road. It was only when he got home and started to watch the news and listen to the media that he realised it had been set up. He didn't want to call the police as he thought they would just pin everything against him and he'd be done for her kidnapping, so he just didn't say anything at all. When looking into the GoFundMe page, they had realised that Keith had written 2 cheques, one for $31,000 and one for around $1,160. He'd banked the larger cheque and given the other one to Sherri. They then proceeded to use this money to pay off their personal credit cards and use the money on their family. After this, Sherri used her story to go to the California Victims Commission Board and ask them for help, as they'd give money to people who had been through violent crimes, and she was able to get around $30,000. So on the 12th of August 2021, they brought Sherri in for questioning again and gave her a chance to come clean. Now they knew the truth. However, she stuck to her story and said that she was abducted. They even went as far as to show her pictures of her ex-boyfriend's house and ask her if this had been the place that she was kept. She said it looked familiar, but it wasn't the same place. They then went on to say that a Latino family had come forward and confessed to the crime. However, she stuck to her story and just said she didn't want to press charges towards them, as they had been the reason that she had got home to her children. Following this, they told her about the DNA that was on the pants and said that it was her ex-boyfriend's, and she just denied this and still stuck to her story. So on the 3rd of March 2022, Sherri was finally arrested for faking her kidnapping and for taking money from the compensation board. They'd followed her from her home to where her children were playing piano. Someone went inside and told her that her car had been hit just to get her out of the building away from her children. However, when she went outside and realised she was getting arrested, she kicked up such a fuss and tried to escape. She was kicking and screaming so much that her children came out of the building and witnessed her getting arrested. Her bail was set for $120,000 and she had to give up her passport, surrender any guns that she had, not drink any alcohol and go and get a psych evaluation.
Sherri, the judge ordered psychiatric treatment. The judge ordered psychiatric treatment. How do you feel about that? The judge ordered psychiatric treatment. How do you feel about that?
So on the 3rd of March, she signed a plea deal admitting to her kidnapping, and her sentencing is due for July. She described how she was deeply ashamed of herself and was sorry to anyone that was involved. She faces up to 20 years in prison and a £500,000 fine. We'll update you as the case goes along and let you know what the outcome is. There's so many questions in this case, but the main one is why? Why did she fake her own kidnapping? There was no proof that her husband ever hurt her, And when she got back, she went to live with him again. So why did she do it? Was she just after attention? It seems a bit of an extreme thing to do just to get someone to notice you. There are also so many questions surrounding her husband and whether he was involved or not. It seems very strange that he would take a picture of the phone just when he had found it. Most people would have been in panic and just picked up the phone and just called the police. There's also questions of why he spent the GoFundMe money. Why didn't he donate it or give it to somebody that needed it? There's also questions of why he's sticking by her side. Because if he didn't know anything about it, then why would he just forgive her for putting him through that? And also what she'd put her children through. Finally, there's a question of how much her ex-boyfriend actually knew. Did he really not watch any of the news when she was missing, even though they lived in the same state? And he didn't question any of her weird behaviour. Let me know your thoughts and comments below of why you think she did it, and also how much involvement you think her husband and ex-boyfriend had in the case. A lot of people are frustrated with this case, as there was so much time and effort spent on her that could have been spent on somebody else that actually needed it. They also spent about $230,000 on her case, which could have been spent elsewhere. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, be sure to check out last week's video, which goes through what happens when you cross a witch doctor. Thank you for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.
You call me a saint, but you know I'm a stranger, all willing and able.